Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to show you Jacob Aaagaard's 3 questions from his book Positional Play, Grandmaster Preparation Positional Play. And these are the only 3 questions you have to ask yourself in any position in order to understand it well enough to be able to play a good enough move and not to blunder. These 3 questions are going to help you avoid missing simple things, and they're going to help you come up with a plan in complex positions with no obvious answer. So when there's no easy recapture, no simple mate threat, or no natural moves like rook e1, rook d1, h3 or something, asking yourself these 3 questions is going to help navigate the position. So the 3 questions are: what's the worst placed piece, where the weakness is, and what does my opponent want to do? In any order. I mean, in some positions, one of those questions is going to be the key question. In some positions, another, and in some positions, all 3 are going to be necessary to come up with the best plan. I've chosen 3 positions of mine, where 2 of them where I have consciously applied the 3 questions and managed to find the best plan, and one of them in which I didn't. And I specifically remember what I was thinking in that 3rd position, which you're going to see, where I blundered. And had I answered the 3 questions, I think I would have found the best move and won the game. And as it turned out, I almost lost. I managed to draw miraculously. So Jacob Aaagaard is a famous coach, and he's probably one of the most famous people that teach chess, and his series Grandmaster Preparation is personally my favorite series of chess books, and I find them to be the most comprehensive and most useful chess books, and they are applicable to all, let's say, serious tournament players. I think they are a bit hard for anybody below 2000. They are still hard for me, and my completion rate in the tasks in the books isn't well over 50%. That's all I'm going to say on my first attempt, but they are still very, very useful, and I would urge you to get them. There are 5 books in the series: Grandmaster Preparation, Strategic Play, Positional Play, Calculation, Attack and Defense, and Endgame Play, unless I'm missing a 6th book. But okay. In any case, I'm not trying to promote his books. I'm not selling his books. I just love them. Okay, so we are going to be looking at 3 positions from my games, and we are going to be looking for the best plan while answering the 3 questions. What we are going to do then is we're going to play out all 3 positions against Nocti, a human-like AI, try to apply our plans and see how a very strong human would play against our plans. Of course, you can use Nocti on any difficulty. You can pretend that it's a weaker opponent, but we're going to use a very hard difficulty. So let's start with the first position. So this is my game against Lovro Čupić. He's a FIDE master. This is a Karo Khan. Excuse me. Let's answer the questions. Where are the weaknesses? In my mind, there was only one weakness in this position, only one I could target easily, and that was the g6 pawn. So obviously, if I was attacking the g pawn in this position, I'd be able to simply take it, because the h pawn is pinned since the rook is hanging. Okay, so that's for my opponent's position. In my position, there is one weakness that's sort of abstract, and that's this diagonal and this file, the b file. Why? Well, my opponent would surely like to play the move e5 to highlight the fact that my king is weak on g1, and well, that there's queen b6 check. And furthermore, if my bishop should move away, then queen b6 would be a double attack on the king and on the b2 pawn. So that's a weakness in my position. Other than that, I don't think I have any weaknesses. Okay, so this is the main target. What's the worst placed piece? For my opponent, it's definitely the f8 bishop. The rooks, of course, are still bad, so is this one, and so is this knight. But when you answer the question about the worst placed piece, you want to give not only an honest answer, but a logical one. Saying that this rook is bad is true, but there's nothing you can do about it. Moving it to g8 wouldn't make any sense. In order to improve the rook, you have to move the bishop first, then you have to move the king. So this bishop on f8 is the actual problem. For white, this bishop is okay, it has a future. This knight is bad, but it cannot move until the bishop has moved, because knight a3 would lead to a disaster. Bishop takes and pawn takes, and then c3 is weak and everything is tied down. So I would say both sides have to do something about these two pieces. So for black, the worst placed piece is the bishop on f8. And when I answer the question about the worst placed piece, I always think about the worst placed piece, both for myself and for my opponent. Why? If you identify your opponent's worst placed piece, then you may be able to come up with a plan that prevents them from improving it. Now, what does my opponent want to do? The third question, arguably the most important one. If we combine the answers to the first two questions, we may be able to come up with the answer to the third question. And usually the answer to what's my opponent's idea, what does my opponent want to do, is somehow includes improving the worst piece and covering the weaknesses. So what I was thinking black wants to do here is play king f7 at some point to cover g6, and then play bishop d6, improving the bishop, putting it on the only sensible square. These are taken, bishop e7 makes no sense, and then playing for e5, targeting the weakness on b2, and the king with queen b6 check. So my opponent wants to solidify g6, play bishop d6, push through with e5, and that would solve all of their problems. So how do we prevent that? We know that this is the worst piece, this is the weakness. We know that they want to play bishop d6 and e5. So this was my plan after I had answered the three questions. I'm going to play knight f4, attacking g6, preventing the bishop from developing. That sort of forces either king f7 or rook g8, probably king f7. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to play against the bishop. So you could say that when it comes to the bishop on f8, knight f4 is a tempo move because black cannot do anything about it. Then I'm going to play knight f4 to d3. Why? Because that covers e5. It directly plays against my opponent's idea of bishop d6, e5. My knight's covering e5. It's also covering f4, which will enable me to get rid of my worst placed piece, the bishop on c1, by placing it on f4 and immediately challenging the diagonal. So I played knight f4. My opponent played king f7. I should say that my opponent is about 2300 FIDE, 2250, he's a FIDE master. He played king f7, of course. I played knight d3, and now if black doesn't play bishop d6, then I'm just gonna go bishop to f4, and he's gonna end up with a queen on d6, and I may even be able to play queen f4, exchanging queens. He did play bishop d6, and I played bishop f4. And from here, we got an equal position in which I was preventing his main plan for a while. Eventually, he traded the queens off, played e5, and we were in an equal middle game where black had an isolated d-pawn. So notice how combining g6, the bishop on f8, the e5 pawn break, these weaknesses for me and this bad bishop for me led me to find knight f4, knight d3, bishop f4. And that was the best move. That was the best plan. Now, let's test this against Nocti. Let's play knight f4 against Nocti and see what it does. Nocti is a great tool. That's all I want to say to start with. It's a human-like AI you can play against. You can play against any custom position you set. You can track your progress. My progress isn't great because I haven't been playing a lot of games. But as you play games, as you play out these custom positions, you're gonna get ranks. My current rank is bishop 4. So from your games, you can solve flashcards, which are basically mistakes you have made in the positions you played out against Nocti. The best feature, in my opinion, are themes, where you can create a theme and play in any custom position. This is what I use the most. And you can also create repertoires. So any repertoire you want to import here, you can do that and play the positions out against Nocti. The best thing is that Nocti is going to play like a human, not like an engine. It's going to deviate from theory. It's going to play tricky moves when it's losing. It's going to play good human moves and not necessarily the best engine recommendation. You can, of course, choose the difficulty level, and then if you choose a higher level, it's going to be more resilient. So now let's create a theme with this position against Chupic. So let's say Chupic. Let's add an element. Let's add an FEN. Okay, I want to play as white, and I'm going to set Nocti to queen 4. So Chupic. And let's save this element. Let's save this theme, and let's practice against Chupic Nocti. Okay, so I'm gonna go for the same plan that I have described. So I'm gonna go knight f4. I think king f7 is forced. Okay, knight d3. Ah, it likes my move. e5 straight away. That's interesting. So let's see. Takes knight, takes bishop f4. Takes knight, takes bishop f4, bishop d6, knight takes, bishop takes, queen takes, knight d2, queen e3 wins a knight. Oh no, it doesn't. I have queen f2. So d5, knight e5, bishop f4, bishop d6, knight e5, bishop e5, queen e5, knight d2, queen e3, queen f2. That should be equal. So I'm gonna do that. Unless there's knight g6, bishop f4, knight g6, bishop c7, knight h4. Aha, maybe there is knight g6. Oh no, knight g6 I take on f6. So bishop f4, knight g6, queen f6, check, gf6, bishop c7 wins a piece, so that's fine. Ooh, there's queen b6. My god, there's queen b6. Oof, oof, oof. Bishop f4, queen b6 check. That's annoying. That's annoying. Bishop f4, queen b6 loses a piece. Okay, so I cannot do that. Stupid, stupid. So let's just take the knight, because I don't see anything better. Okay, queen e3 not threatened. If I develop my knight, then it is. Also, Nocti may wish to play d4 straight away and bishop c5. So I think I should go queen f2 to prevent bishop c5 check followed by d4. Oof, okay, good. Good, good, good. Preventing d4 and bishop c5. And my next move, oof, it prevents bishop d6. Prevents bishop d6. So can I play knight a3, c2, d4? I want to set up a blockade of the d5 pawn. Knight a3, queen e2, let's say knight c2 takes, king takes is fine. Bishop c5, does that work? No. Knight a3, bishop a3, ba3, queen c3 loses a pawn. That loses a pawn. What do I do? If I go knight d2, I can go knight d2, knight b3, knight d4. That also makes sense, but then maybe queen e3, knight d2, queen e3, knight b3 takes, that's fine. I'm gonna play knight d2, knight a3 loses material. Okay, that's a good move. Nocti also gives you immediate feedback. Okay, attacks the h2 pawn. I guess g3 is the only move. Is g3 the only move? I think so. I don't see anything else. So knight b3, knight d4, setting up a blockade is my plan. Okay, wants to play bishop b6. So I better play knight b3 immediately to play knight d4. So knight b3, bishop b6, knight d4, bishop d4, cd4 should be equal. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. I have to prevent bishop b6, winning my queen. I don't get this move. I mean, it's on the highest setting, so it's gonna be something tricky, but I don't understand what. So I may just develop my bishop now to d2 so that I can play. Oh, maybe queen h3, but no, that makes no sense. I'm gonna play bishop d2. Okay, knight d4 forced. Queen h3 doesn't do much unless knight g4 works. I don't think it works because I take with check. So I'm just gonna play rook fe1. Okay, let's stop here. I mean, my plan was successful and Nocte didn't manage to cause any serious issues, I think. It does. All right, let's move on to the second position. So this position is something I've played recently in a tournament in Villard-de-Lans in France, and I was facing a woman FIDE master, Cyrielle Monpou. Sorry for the pronunciation. I don't really pronounce French well. So it's black to play. And let's answer the three questions. This position, even though it's simpler to understand, it is not easy to navigate. And it required a lot of understanding, I think, to come up with the best plan and to defend. So, where are the weaknesses? This one is obvious. h7 is the biggest weakness. The pawn cannot advance. The king is weak because of h7, because of this bishop. Okay, the rook can come to e3 and to h3, targeting h7. So definitely h7 in my position is the biggest weakness, and my king. I would say that my opponent has no weaknesses. What's the worst placed piece? Again, the answer is extremely obvious, is the bishop on c8. This bishop is just awful. It has no future unless it comes out to a6. Okay, the third question, what does my opponent want to do? Once again, very simple. My opponent wants to play rook e3, rook h3, queen h7, checkmate. And I cannot play normal moves like rook d8 because that still doesn't prevent queen takes h7. My king cannot escape to f8 while the queen is on h6. And if I lose h7, it's going to be a disaster. Because let's say the king reaches e7, the queen is on h7, bishop takes g6, the bishop cannot be taken, I just resign. So let's combine our three answers into a plan. We know that this is our worst placed piece. We know that our king and the h7 pawn are the biggest weakness. We know that my opponent wants to play rook e3, rook h3, queen h7, checkmate. So the first thing I was thinking about is, how can I defend? How can I defend h7? And they came up with one sort of convenient idea, which is to play queen c7 and f6. Okay, if it comes to rook h3 and my queen is on c7, I can play f6. If it comes to rook h3 and my pawn is on f6, I can play queen c7 defending, or queen b7 if my queen is on a6. Okay, I want to trade this bad bishop for this excellent bishop. So bishop a6 obviously is the main move. Now I had to calculate. Bishop a6 is the best move. Has to be, if it works. So my calculation was, okay, bishop a6, rook e3. If I take the bishop, does my opponent have time for rook h3? This is where calculation was important. No, because if rook h3, I can then take on c2 with check, which drags the king out to c2 and gives me a tempo to play queen c7 check, followed by f6, defending h7. If the bishop isn't taken, and I play bishop a6, rook e3, bishop takes d3, rook h3, bishop takes c2 check, king a1, then my bishop is actually on c2, it's not attacked, so my bishop can defend h7 and I can simply play g5. So when I take on d3, my opponent cannot take, my opponent must take the bishop. So once again, let's calculate. Let's assume my opponent sees bishop c2 check and takes the bishop. Bishop a6, rook e3. Bishop takes d3. Let's assume rook d takes d3. What do I do next? How do I defend? Okay, I'm going to show you what happened. So I played bishop a6. Whoa, sorry, let me just turn off the variation arrows. Rook here, takes, takes. How would you defend from here? Well, I simply played queen c7. And after rook h3, f6 defends everything. And also there's a weakness on c2, and my opponent eventually played queen d2, having to defend. I played a5 followed by rook c8 and so on and so on, and I ended up drawing the game. So this position was a bit simpler because it was very, very clear where the danger was for black, and it forced me to come up with this plan. I don't think there's any other plan. If I leave this bishop on c8, I'm just gonna lose. Now let's test this one against Nocti. Let's see if Nocti is going to find a way to beat me nonetheless. Okay, let's set up this second position and play it out against Nocti. So once again, create team. Sorry if I have misspelled my opponent's name, but I think this is correct. Okay, I want to play black, and once again let's set it to queen 4, which is about 2800, something like that. Save element, save theme, and let's practice. Okay, so let's go for the same plan, bishop a6. You can also, okay, it takes, that's fine. You can also go back and get a hint if you make a mistake. Okay, so now it wants to go rook h3. So I'm kind of tempted to just go f6 because of rook f7. I don't need to defend with white queen. So yeah, that's fine. Okay, attacks the pawn. I'm not sure I want to defend with my rooks. And I also want to keep my queen defending e6 and this pawn. So let's just go queen b6. That way I can also move my a pawn. Oof, this is dangerous. So on h5, g5, f4 seems okay. I can also just ignore this, and on h5, let's say a5, h5, rook f7 takes, queen h6, rook g7. Oof, but yeah, then rook h1. So I definitely don't want to play h5, creating another hook. So I'm thinking I'm gonna play g5 against h5. And I'm also thinking I need to defend e6 and free up my queen, and I need to play e5 at some point. I could also consider playing a5, rook a7. That makes sense. So let's play a5. Okay, that's okay. So g5, 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 f4, g5, f4, h6 takes, f takes, opens up my rook. Oof, this is scary. I'm gonna go g5. It's okay. Okay, h6, h6. Okay, I have to defend the pawn, so let's go rook a e8. Okay, queen g6 threatened, so I need to be able to play queen g7. So I'm thinking queen c7, a7, or b7, so that on queen g6, queen g7 can be played. Rook g7 fails to queen takes h6. If I go f5, then takes, opens up the pawn. I don't want to allow that. However, if I move my queen, then rook e6. Wow, am I just worse here? f5, fg, hg. That's scary. But I don't have another option without dropping material, so I'm gonna go f5. Oh, this is gonna be a blunder. I would assume that I'm much worse here. This is the best move, okay. Okay. I would be very scared to play like this. Wow. Once again, if I play f4 now, then queen g6. And once again, I don't have an easy way to defend. Takes. Oh my god, what do I do? Nocti can even sack the queen for 2 rooks. If I recapture with the rook, then queen f5, e5, rook takes. How do I defend? And if I go rook f6, rook f6 takes. Rook f6 does nothing. Wow, what do I do? You see why playing out positions against Nocti is a good idea? This is a very human plan. And I'm in a world of pain now. Can I go rook e7 to prevent queen f5 and rook takes e7 being with check at least? Takes. I don't know. I'm just gonna go rook e7. Okay, that was. Let's go back and let's get a hint. I really wonder what the best move is. King h8. I understand king h8. I don't understand queen c6. What's queen c6? Maybe trying to get to c2. Okay, let's play my move once again. Let's see. Okay, yeah, this is a very concrete threat. Wants to take, and take the rook on e7. So now I have to defend my rook. Or I can, oh my god, what do I do? Okay, this is a blitz move I would play. It's a mistake. My god, yeah, I'm losing. Let's go back. Let's get a hint. Wow, f4 giving away g5 with check? No way. No way. No, this is busted. This is just busted. I'm resigning. Okay, yeah, this position I would play out a couple of times. So you get the idea. Visit Nocti by following the link in the description and use the code hanging pawns. Let's go back to the video. Okay. The third position is from a tournament I played early in the year in the Sesvete Open tournament against an 1800 opponent. So why don't you try to answer the 3 questions before I show you how I blundered and before I show you how I could have gotten a winning position by answering them correctly. Okay, white to play. I played the move bishop d4. I'm telling you this before I answer the 3 questions because it's important to understand my blunder. Now, let me start by answering the 3rd question first. What does my opponent want to do? The simplest answer is bishop takes, pawn takes, knight takes. I resign, I lose 2 pawns. Or bishop takes, pawn takes, knight takes. Attacking the pawn on c3, I lose a pawn, I probably lose the game. So bishop d4 made a ton of sense. Bishop d4 prevents that. However, bishop d4 completely neglects the other features of the position. So now let's answer the 3 questions. Where are the weaknesses? And in this very complex position, there are so many weaknesses that it would have taken me, let's say, 5 minutes to answer this correctly. Well, the first weakness is obvious. It's the e4 pawn for us because bishop c3 is threatened. The second weakness is the queen. The queen isn't defended. And if you've ever played against the Sicilian, then you'll know that the queen on a5 can often be punished with knight d5. And after queen takes, if there's, let's say, a pawn on f7, you may be able to play knight f7 check and then recapture the queen. And if there's a pawn on d5 that comes with winning a pawn. So let me show you, for example. So here, d5, knight takes d5, queen takes, knight f7 check. Let's assume there's a pawn on f7, king h8 is forced, then you take the queen, and then you're up a pawn. So that's the usual pattern. So the queen is a weakness. What else is weak? The d6 pawn is weak. It's only defended once. If it falls, the knight is weak because it's already attacked by the bishop, and if our queen takes on d6, the knight would be double attacked. What else is weak? These pieces have not developed. This knight is on e8, which means then that the 8th rank is weak, and we may be able to infiltrate. It also means that the pieces are very hard to develop. What else is weak? I would say that black's king is weak. Why? Because all of black's pieces are over on the queen side, And if we can open the position up, while the queen, knight, rook, and bishop are sort of waiting on the queen side, black's king could be in trouble. We have a bishop on e3, a bishop on e2, a queen is able to come into the game, the knight could come to e5, if the f-file opens up, then our rook is active. So many weaknesses. Weakness, 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 weakness. The back rank is a weakness, the 7th rank is a weakness, the king is a weakness, undeveloped pieces. What's the worst placed piece? Well, that's easy to answer for white's position. White's pieces are excellent. Considering the pawn structure, there really are no very bad pieces. And for black, definitely these 3 pieces. They are on the back rank, they have no scope. The knight on e8 is completely misplaced. It has no squares. If it moves to c7, you just take on d6. If it doesn't move, then maybe queen d8 is coming in the future. What does my opponent want to do? Well, my opponent, the simplest answer is wants to take. Okay, and then maybe they want to play e5, breaking the position open and giving their pieces some squares. Also, they would like to develop their pieces. So given time, if I even if I defend this, my opponent is going to break the position open. So what ended up happening is after bishop d4, my opponent played e5. And now I'm just worse. So fe5, my opponent can play bishop h3, developing with tempo. If pawn takes, excuse me, then I have knight e5, so that doesn't really work. Basically with e5, my opponent managed to get a very good position, opening up this bishop, giving this knight e6, breaking open my structure, and getting space. Now, we know that my opponent wants to take on c3, we know that my opponent wants to play e5 to liberate their pieces. We know that all of these are weaknesses. We know that there are many bad pieces. So what we have to do is highlight those weaknesses. I'm not saying that I would have found this had I answered the 3 questions correctly. I think I would have. The best plan here to highlight everything I've said is to play e5. Why? Well, e5 prevents bishop c3, first of all. So we're dealing with the immediate threat. Secondly, it gets the e-pawn away from the knight. So even if this knight falls, knight e4 doesn't win a pawn. Thirdly, we're threatening to take. Not only are we threatening to win a pawn, we're also threatening to undefend this knight. Once the knight is undefended, well then knight e4, knight d5 will attack the queen, and at the end of the line, if the d-pawn wasn't on the board, the knight on c5 would be hanging. Where can the knight retreat? Well, I don't know, d7 blocks the bishop, a6 seems very bad. So what can my opponent do? Now it's time to calculate. Well, either d5 advancing the pawn or taking. There is no way to defend unless you play queen c7, and when you play queen c7, I'm just able to win. So queen c7 takes, queen takes, defending the knight is forced, takes, and you pick up a piece. So that's game over. So on e5, the pawn cannot be defended, either takes or advances. d5 advancing the pawn is the simplest variation to refute. Why? Because of the undefended queen. Knight takes d5, winning a pawn. Okay, the queen is hanging, you cannot take the knight, you have to take the queen. And now the same pattern that I had mentioned, knight e7 check. If king h8, then we just win a pawn, we recapture the queen. So let's look at king f7. If king f7, we recapture the queen. And of course, king takes knight loses to the very simple bishop c5 check, picking up the piece and winning the exchange in the end. So completely unplayable for black, completely busted. We are going to be up an exchange, up a pawn, with a huge lead in development, and black is left with this awful bishop on c8. So on e5, d5 cannot be played. The pawn has to be taken. Now what happens when d5 is played? This knight is no longer defended twice. Okay, so let's take the pawn. Knight takes e5. If my opponent plays a random move, like let's say a6, then we can just go rook a1, improving our last piece. And how does black develop? Bishop d7 loses a piece. How? I don't see a good way to develop. Knight c7 blocks the 8th rank. and the 7th rank, and our pieces may be able to infiltrate. So a random move makes very little sense. Let's assume the bishop takes the knight, because that's the most sensible. So bishop takes, f takes. Now, find a move for black. I challenge you to find a move for black. If rook takes rook, rook takes rook, let's say knight c7, trying to develop, well, this is mate in 3. That makes no sense. If bishop d7, we can just go queen d4, double attacking the knight. Once the knight moves away, we take the bishop. Or if the knight is defended, we play queen f4, threatening here, here, everything. Queen f7, bishop, okay, bishop takes is check, so we wouldn't do that, but queen f7 is sufficient. On fe5, if, let's say, knight d7, trying to defend, that seems like the most sensible option. Look at these pieces. We can now take on f8. Let's say king takes f8, rook f1 check, king g7, bishop g4, we are on the pawn. If the queen takes on e5, then just bishop d4 wins the queen, so that doesn't work. So I chose this position on purpose. This is a position I failed, and even if I have had enough mental concentration to answer the 3 questions consciously, maybe I would have messed it up. So this is an extreme case, a very rich position in which I went from winning to losing, or almost losing, in a single move, basically from +3 to -1 because of one simple blunder. Okay, I hope the 3 questions were useful for you. So Aagaard says in positional play that the 3 questions are to be repeated until they get into our subconscious mind and we start answering them automatically. And that's ideal. During training, you repeat these questions in any position, in every position. And then by the time you actually play a tournament game, you start answering them automatically. So once again, those are my favorite books. I think Aagaard is the best coach in the world. And if I could somehow get to work with him, I think that would be the biggest thing for my chess. Since I cannot, and since you cannot, I would advise you to either get his books, they are great, or start applying the 3 questions in your games. Thank you very much for watching. The link to Nocti is in the description below. Please check it out. I think it's amazing to have a sparring partner that plays like a human. I mean, I found it very useful. I'm training against Nocti in positions which I used to play out against the engine, and it's a huge improvement. Thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned for more chess. See you later. Bye-bye.